Chefs Without Restaurants, episode 154 with Eli Kulp.
But this one I was done early, so I jumped on the 905 train, Amtrak train 188. Walked down the platform, got on the train as normal. 9 minutes in to the train ride, it was dark. I couldn't really tell how fast we were going or where we were or anything. And I feel like this really big shudder in the train, more than normal. And, within a second, the train had derailed off the track, going 108 miles an hour in a curve that was a 55 mile an hour curve. I go flying through the air, and whatever reason, I turned about 90 degrees in the air, and my neck hit squarely against the luggage rack of the other opposite seats, and it immediately, compressed my spinal cord and shattered the spine there. So, and sort of fell into a heap under a bunch of stuff and debris, and it was dark, and nobody knew what was going on. I pretty much knew that my life had changed in a big way. I was paralyzed from essentially the chest down at that moment.
This is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast with your host, Chris Spear. Each week, I'll be speaking with food entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry. If you're interested in learning more about our organization dedicated to helping people build and grow their food businesses, look us up on the web at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org, and on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Chefs Without Restaurants. Now, enjoy the show. Almost every day, I wake up and expect that I'm going to have a somewhat normal day. Good things happen. Sometimes bad things happen. Not usually anything terrible. But sometimes there's a day where, I don't know, your luck runs out. Maybe this is a depressing way to start a podcast, but this episode's really had me thinking about some things. Chef Eli Kulp was just coming home from work one day. He was taking the Amtrak train, and the train derailed. 8 people on that train died. Thankfully, he was not one of them, but he went flying through the air. His back hit the luggage rack, and it left him paralyzed. He's now in a wheelchair. He was a chef at the top of his game, Food and Wine, Best New Chef, all the accolades, right? Not that accolades are everything, but just to say that he was a chef's chef. He was in the process of getting another restaurant opened, and in the blink of an eye, that's it. What would you do? Could you imagine if tomorrow you were bound to a wheelchair and you couldn't even use your hands and you had to go through months and months of rehab? I don't know. I was just amazed at how he took something like that and has kind of been able to recover from that and even look on the bright side of things, I guess. He's got a young son. I think his son was 3 at the time when this happened. And, working in restaurants is tough on families. Who knows what kind of time he would have had with his son if he was living that previous life, running multiple restaurants in different cities. So maybe it was a blessing in disguise. So on the show, he's going to talk about his story of, how he started in the food business. We have some fun conversation too. We talk about his mom's love of microwave cooking. We talk about his love of the Philadelphia roast pork sandwich and not being a fan of the Philly cheesesteak. I know that's a controversial thing there. But the heart of this story is that literally in seconds, his life was changed forever. And not only is he going to relate that story, but he is also going to just talk about, the depression that came out of this. He said he didn't even know if he wanted to continue living. So I'm so glad that Eli is still with us. He now has 2 fantastic podcasts, which you should definitely check out. And I think he's an inspiration and someone who I think is going to continue to change the food service industry. So I hope you enjoy this episode and just take a moment to be grateful for all the gifts you have, all the blessings you have, and the life that you have. And just a quick note that the podcast release day for now is going to be changing to Wednesday. So I'm just going to be kind of moving the schedule around a little bit. If you have opinions on that, feel free to drop me a line. And as always, you can find me on Instagram at Chefs Without Restaurants or hit me up via email at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. And this is the part where I talk about sponsors. If you go to chefswithoutrestaurants.com/sponsors, you're going to find all the info on our current sponsors, previous sponsors, and affiliate partners. With the affiliate partners, all that means is those are products I already use and love. If you click on the links on that page, it costs you literally nothing, but I'm going to get a small commission when you buy stuff. And I'm most thankful for our podcast audio ad sponsors. So before this week's episode starts, you're going to hear from this week's sponsor, the United States Personal Chef Association. So thanks so much for listening, and have a great week. Over the past 30 years, the world of the personal chef has grown in importance to fulfill those dining needs. While the pandemic certainly upended the restaurant experience, it allowed personal chefs to close that dining gap. Central to all of that is the United States Personal Chef Association. Representing nearly 1,000 chefs around the U.S. and Canada, USPCA provides a strategic backbone to those chefs that includes liability insurance, training, communications, certification, and more. It's a reassurance to consumers that the chef coming into their home is prepared to offer them an experience with their meal. USPCA provides training to become a personal chef through our preparatory membership. Looking to showcase your products or services to our chefs and their clients? Partnership opportunities are available. Call Angela today at 1-800-995-2138, extension 705, or email her at aprather@uspca.com for membership and partner info. Hey, Eli. Welcome to the show. It's great to see you.
What's going on? How are you? Good to be here.
I'm fantastic. I always love when I have a chef who podcasts. I mean, I love all my chefs on my show, but it's also nice to connect with someone who kind of has both the dual interest going on there.
I tell you what, podcasting is opened so many doors, and it's one of those things you don't expect it to. When you start out, you just expect these interviews, and I'll publish them, and they're simple, and they're straightforward, and no frills, and then you kind of get a little bit more into the craft, and you learn that there's a whole skill set behind it, and you sort of apply that same work ethic to what you do in the kitchen, but you do it for the podcast. And yeah, it's been fun, man. It's been a fun ride. So yeah, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. I find it really rewarding, like the feedback I get from people who say, I listened to this episode and it was great and it really helped me, or, I was able to acquire customers or charge more for my services after listening to this episode. I find it really fulfilling to, do you get good feedback like that from listeners?
I do. It's amazing just walking down the street sometime, and farmers markets are, there's like a lot of foodies there at the farmers market. So they're always like, hey, chef, love the show. I've been getting so much out of it, whether it's a cook or another chef. It's been great. And I actually was able to do a live event, was it last week in Philly, where we raised a bunch of money for a local food organization. That was, we had 125 people there. We had 15 chefs cooking. Yeah, it was great, and did some live interviews on stage. It was a blast. So yeah, like I said, podcasting, it's one of those things where you start out thinking one thing, and before you know it, you're in this whole other stratosphere of potential opportunities. So it's been great.
And not something that you came up with. You didn't go to school for media or journalism or anything like that, right? You're a chef's chef, and I'd say a pretty well-known chef, especially in your area. I usually start the show with kind of like culinary background. So let's start there. Growing up, food, cooking, was that something you were always into? Did you love eating as a kid? When did you start cooking professionally?
I would say food was never like the center of, our family. My mom immigrated from Holland when she met my father down in Lake Tahoe. They were a couple traveling hippies, and they met, and they found this little spot in Washington State where I grew up, at the end of a dirt road, a little single wide trailer. And, I wouldn't say we weren't poor, but we were under the poverty line. Like, no doubt about it. My dad was a timber worker, so there'd be times he was on unemployment for big stretches. And, as the timber industry went kind of back and forth with, we had the spotted owl out there, and it shut down so much timber work that, for him, I remember that period of my life. But my mom actually learned to cook a little bit from my dad, which doesn't even make sense when I think about it, because he never cooks. But regardless, she had her, 10 recipes that she would kind of recycle. And, there's some good ones. I still love them. Sauerkraut with some kielbasa and mashed potatoes. Takes me right back to childhood. You know what I mean? But she had some ones that were like sweet and sour meatballs out of the Betty Crocker cookbook with canned pineapple and cornstarch, and so there was always food on the table. We were never hungry, but there was times when we were, waiting in line to get free cheese, at the food bank. So it wasn't until I was 14 years old when a lady came to the small town I grew up in. It's called Mossy Rock, Washington. It's 500 people in this town, extremely small, extremely remote. There's not a lot around there. And she opened this tiny little cafe called Irish Rose Cafe, and it had linens on the table. It had these green napkins. I was wearing a green cummerbund and bow tie. And we're talking about a small redneck town, you know what I mean? And she had these aspirations of, maybe the tourists that would come in, throughout the summer. We had some festivals and things that we did there. And, she was there for probably almost 10 years, but I got in there as a dishwasher busboy, as sort of the entry for a lot of chefs into the industry. And I really gravitated to the kitchen really quickly. And by the time I left high school, I knew what I wanted to do. And if cooking didn't work out, I was going to be a marine biologist, but cooking worked out. And I immediately went down to Portland after I graduated high school, started cooking down there, went to Seattle that was 2001. I went to Seattle and I was there for about 4 years. And then I wasn't cooking in good restaurants. I was cooking actually in an Irish pub. And I moved to front of the house. I was learning management, and it was a corporate gig. So I learned a lot about numbers and running a restaurant and managing a kitchen and all that at a very young age when I was 20, 21 years old. And then I went to New York and started all over again and went to the CIA there, then went to went and worked in Manhattan. And that's where, I was there for the better part of 9 years. So food for me growing up there wasn't a lot of emphasis on cooking fantastic meals and all that. It was there for consumption. And we sat down and, we talked as a family, and that was it.
It's really funny. Like our parents had a cycle menu at home, right? Like you talk about the 10 same things, like same thing. My mom's recipes, she cooked good food, but it wasn't fancy. And the things that I grew up with, my favorite is called Greco, and it's a casserole with like shell noodles, like shell pasta, and it's like canned tomato sauce, canned mushrooms. Ooh. You saute peppers and onions, add creamed corn, mix that all up and put cheddar cheese on it and bake it in the oven. And I've tried to make fancy versions. I've tried to get like maitake mushrooms. I've tried to use poblano.
Don't ruin it, Chris. Don't ruin it.
It's not the same, like because of the nostalgia. And we talk a lot about that on the podcast. Is like, as a chef in a restaurant, how do you kind of tap into someone else's nostalgia, like not knowing them? Because this dish would maybe be nice for someone else, like if I made it fancy, but I make it at home, I'm like, it doesn't taste like home, right?
Well, it's funny. I was just talking about to somebody yesterday about my mom's love for the microwave, and she still uses it as a main cooking mechanism. And our meatloaf that we had was, you basically mix the meatloaf in a bowl, then you take a glass, like a water glass, you shove it down in the center. So it's like, think of like a bundt cake now, right? So it's kind of like a bundt cake, and then cook it in the microwave, and then make a sweet and sour ketchup just by adding sugar to ketchup. Slather that on top and throw that after it's warm, and throw it on the table, and eat your meatloaf. And she did asparagus wrapped in ham with cheese. Working mother, you gotta do what you gotta do. I don't blame her, and I still can taste those, and they make me happy. So she did something right.
David Chang was just nominated for a James Beard Award for his microwave cookbook, right? It's like one of 3 best cookbooks this past year. And it was like David Chang's book on microwave cooking.
I had no idea. I did not know that.
Really? Yeah, it came out last year. I think it's just called like How to Cook or something like that. But he co-wrote this book on like microwave use, and
he's got the Midas touch, so
he does. So maybe your mom was just ahead of the curve. She should have written her microwave cookbook.
Listen, I don't hate a microwave. I don't. I don't use it for everything.
No, time and place. It
time
works.
And place.
Well, how did you end up in Philly? You're not from there. I know you talked about New York, so kind of bring us up to the Philly era. You got to Philly, how, and what were you doing in Philly?
So I was in New York City. This was going back to 2012, and I'd been in New York, for roughly 8 or 9 years at that point. And I was working at a restaurant called Teresi Italian Specialties, and this was a restaurant. It was a phenomenon restaurant. It was one of those lightning in a bottle ones. It was two really good friends of mine, Mario Carbone and Rich Teresi. And they went to the CIA together. They were roommates at the CIA. They've been, they were fast friends, and they still are just this odd couple that they're just a blast to be around. But they put their life savings, they put their family savings in this little restaurant in Little Italy, little tiny thing. It was 900 square feet altogether, I think, including the kitchen. So the dining room was about 500 square feet, and we had like 25 seats. And what they were able to do, they started cooking with a New York point of view, but through an Italian lens, right? So they had this little shop. They looked like a little Italian market. They had, all these classic, Italian American brands on the shelves to kind of give it that feel of an Italian market. Daytime was sandwiches, and there'd be a line out around the block for sandwiches. Then at nighttime, they would flip it into this little prefix menu that had essentially 3 courses. You had antipasti, you had pasta, and you couldn't choose anything. The only thing you could choose was your entree. It was just 3 of us. They brought me on as a chef de cuisine because they wanted to open up another restaurant. So they said, like I said, I worked with both of them in the past, and they said, Eli, come down, help us run this restaurant. We can help, we can focus on other areas. I said, listen, I'll do it for you guys. I even took a pay cut because they couldn't afford me. I said, but listen, I'm not going to be there and just be in your shadow. Like, if you tell me that you can give me a restaurant, Rich has his restaurant now, Mario wanted his restaurant, I want to be in line for the 3rd restaurant, I will do that. You know what I mean? I will do that for you guys. And that was a plan. Like, they baked me into the business model of Carbone, and when they were going to open it. But going into it, it's this Italian-American restaurant, this high-end Italian-American restaurant. And I just felt it wasn't me. I wasn't going to be able to be there and just cook with love, because that's not who I am. I'm not Italian-American, right? So, I reached out to Alfred Ehrlich, who's like the dude that's placed so many chefs all around the city in all these different restaurants. He knows every chef. He's basically a recruiter. And my business partner, Ellen Yin, in Philadelphia, had reached out to him about the same time. So he called me and said, hey, what do you think about going to Philly? I'm like, where's Philly? I'd been, 8, 9 years in New York at that point, and I'd never even been to Philly. It never even crossed my mind to go to Philadelphia. Not only did it cross my mind, but I had it could have been 10 hours away. I had to look on a map and see
how 2 hours. Come on.
It's less than 2 hours. You can get, if I leave right now from Philadelphia and drive to New York, it's an hour and a half. And on a train, it's even less, right? So I came down here. I loved what she was saying. Fork Restaurant had been in Philadelphia at that point 15 years, and she wanted to bring it up to date. She wanted to modernize it. She wanted, and I loved what she was saying. She was going to give me, a lot of freedom in the kitchen. And what I was able to do, the number one thing you can't do in Philadelphia is come into Philadelphia and say, hey, I'm a chef in New York. Look at me, how good I am. Like, it won't work. Like, they'll be like, get the hell out of here. Get back to New York. Go kick rocks, right? And I knew that going in, because one thing I knew about Philadelphia is it's a prideful city. People love Philadelphia. They're so proud to be a part of Philadelphia. And whether you lived here your whole life or you've been here for 5, 6 years, once you get to know Philly, people fall in love with it, right? So it was this opportunity for me to come down to Philly. I'd been cooking food with Rich and Mario at that point, using this sort of process of, okay, how do you look at food through a personal lens that is a meaningful story, right? Well, my family, even though I didn't grow up here, I didn't have any relatives or close relatives here in Pennsylvania, my family's from here. My dad, the name Kulp, it's a Penn Dutch name that came over in the 1600s. Generations of Kulps were here before me, and my grandparents had moved to Buffalo where my father was raised. And then my father and my mom moved out the West Coast. Well, my grandparents followed them to the West Coast as well. So we were all out there. We were basically a West Coast family at that point. So what I was able to do was apply the same thought process that we were doing in New York City, but for my own personal perspective. So all of a sudden, I find myself with a personal connection. And I'm starting to cook what is Italian-ish food, New American-ish food, but with the perspective of, this is rich heritage. There's a rich heritage in Philadelphia. It's the birthplace of democracy. What else can we do? And it was just this, I was just ripping through, history books and old cookbooks and, my own family and looking at the producers, right? Pennsylvania Dutch, Lancaster, the richest soil in the world, this deep, deep, rich culture of food in Philadelphia and the surrounding areas. And I was able to apply that in a way that the diner, the Philadelphia dining food press, whatever, everybody was like, oh, wow. Okay, so you're cool. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we'll give you a free pass because you're diving into your own history. And all of a sudden we were able to taste some of that. And nobody had done that in Philadelphia because, there was a few restaurants that were here for a long time, right? You had your Le Bec Fin, you had your La Croix, these very high, haute French cuisine restaurants. And then you had Mark Vetri, who had, started doing Italian food, but he was doing real Italian food in Philly. He wasn't doing Philly Italian food, you know what I mean? So he was, he took what he knew from his training out over in Italy and brought that back and, did amazing things. So, this is the first time somebody had said, okay, let's embrace what we're doing in Philly. Like, let's be proud of the food we're doing and let's look at it and, okay, how do we, attach it? So an example of that, there's a rich Jewish community in Philadelphia, just like New York and a lot of East Coast states. And for me, growing up on the West Coast in a small town, I was never, that never really crossed my mind, like what Jewish food is and the importance of it and what it plays in the East Coast sort of diet, I guess you would say. So, for example, I did Philadelphia cream cheese and a little mini bagels for an hors d'oeuvre, but we were making our cream cheese with local milk, right? So technically, and so it was infused with hay and, had these different flavors in it. So, everybody puts Philadelphia cream cheese in their bagel all around the world, right? Those are the type of ideas and thought processes that I was able to apply. And it really took off. Like, people really embraced it and, and sort of the rest was history. So
how much did the menu change when you took over? Because it was a restaurant that was already established, but it sounds like you changed it a lot. And was there any kind of pushback or feedback? I know sometimes customers have favorite restaurants. A new chef comes in, it goes in a little different direction. So what was that like?
Oh, it was a process for sure. At that point, Fork had become a restaurant that was, sort of, I would say, New American French. That was sort of the general feel of the menu. And, it was relatively safe food. And it was, for an audience that wanted safety and comfort and, the consistency. And it was good food. I'm not going to talk shit about it at all. There's a good chef, Terrence Fury, was there before me, and he's a big Philadelphia name, longtime chef in Philly, well trained. However, it was just dated. So the process for me was I didn't want to shock and awe. It was creating safety in the menu, like certain dishes that were going to be okay for a certain clientele. Like, we were doing dry aged guinea hen, with 8-hour cabbage and, we're making our own creme fraiche and, that's the chicken dish, right? So all of a sudden, wait, you're dry aging chicken? It's all about education, right? So you educate the diner and make them comfortable. And that's why servers are so important, right? They're the liaison. They're that attachment between you and the customer. And, so we had a great service staff that was able to, massage those moments and, win people over. So, it took a little bit of time, but, we did it.
And then you were tapped to go to New York and do one up there, right?
This was 2012. We did Fork. A year later, we opened up our second restaurant next door called High Street on Market, which was a bakery / all-day cafe. And this was sort of before the all-day cafe became super popular. And that was born out of what was already there. So Ellen, my partner, had a little like mini takeout cafe called Fork Etc. next door. So I was like, well, they're only using this space during the day. Why don't we do this, right? So I found an amazing baker who had just come down from New York City, Alex Bois. He was the main head baker at Sullivan Street Bakery. I had just found a pastry chef who had just come from Madison, Wisconsin, and she was super talented. She was really on the cusp of what was going on in the pastry world, in tune with what's going on like in Noma and, all these sort of restaurants around the world that were, kind of looking at, the nature around them and the bounty and how to apply that into their menus. And then, John Nodler, who was her husband, but he was just, a hyper talented chef in his own right. And it was just this blend of, 4 people. And I was just, I was just sort of guiding them and helping them figure out the vision. And we really landed on this vision of, amazing breads, again, looking local. We weren't buying grains from outside Pennsylvania. Maybe our all-purpose flour sometimes came, but we were really focusing on, this one mill called Castle Valley Mills. And, they started supplying us with all these amazing grains and corn and all these things. And the bakery aspect really blew up. We had this really robust breakfast and lunch program. But the dinner program was what I always thought was the most fun, but it was like crickets in the beginning, right? It was nobody could understand it because we were doing these kind of oddball pastas, using fermentation and all these things. And, fermentation was, it was sort of in the beginning, now it's everywhere, but this was back, almost 10 years ago. So, we were able to kind of get on that bus a little early, but it took time for people to get it, right? So an example of that would be my favorite sandwich in Philadelphia is the roast pork with sharp provolone and broccoli rabe. That's
amazing.
Like this.
It's a classic.
It is, right? And there's a few places that do it really, really, really well. DeNick's is one of them in Reading Terminal. One's John's Roast Pork in South Philly. And I mean, you could take the cheesesteak and just get rid of it. I don't care. I don't like that sandwich. I never have. I'll say it out loud. It's mediocre at best.
That's a bold statement.
There's like 2 or 3 places that do a good cheesesteak. And part of that reason is because they use like really good bread, right? But the roast pork and broccoli rabe, if anybody's coming to Philly, I mean, you get a cheesesteak, whatever, Instagram it, whatever you want to do, but get a roast pork and broccoli rabe. And with sharp provolone, because it's mind blowing, right? And what I did after I had that sandwich, I was like, holy shit, I know exactly what I'm going to do here. I had been doing a fermented broccoli rabe up in New York at Teresi for a raw scallop dish, and I was like, well, I know what to do. So essentially, we make broccoli rabe kimchi. And put it on this roast pork with broccoli, provolone on our house baked, seeded semolina hoagie roll. And it was just like, boom, like mind blowing, right? And, because the broccoli rabe was usually just like boiled or something put on there. And it was like an afterthought. So, for me, that was like one example of like what really took off. And, we were doing pastrami's and, all these house-made meats. And, so it was really this moment of just hyper creativity. And again, almost more like towards the Teresi side, like Fork was of a more established fine dining restaurant. You had to sort of, you had these sort of parameters and, these, guardrails, I guess you have to work with to sort of keep that standard, where High Street was just a sandbox. It was just fun. And, we were recognized. Bon Appetit gave us, one of their top 10 ranks of best new restaurants there in their magazine. Actually, the number 2 behind my friend Aaron Silverman's restaurant, Rose's Luxury, down in DC.
That was a big deal when that happened that year. Huge.
Yeah. So, Can't say enough about Aaron. We worked together in New York as line cooks and at this crappy little restaurant that didn't even survive, but we stayed in touch, and it was always good to see what he's doing down there. And, for me, it was just this really fun. I had this great team. It was just me. I felt like that coach on the sidelines with the amazingly talented team of people, and you're just trying to make sure that you give them that creative outlet, but you're just sort of, again, you are the guardrails now, as the chef. And then 2015 came around, and we had this opportunity to open a high street up in New York City. There's a lot of buzz about it down here in Philly, and we felt like it was a good opportunity to go up there. So there's a whole nother story, but my wife at the time, her job was between Philly and New York, so it actually made sense for us to kind of get an apartment up in New York, and I would commute back and forth between the two restaurants. So in 2015, we early 2015, I was searching for restaurants. We found one in March. We signed the lease, and we just started to put paper on the windows. The people knew in New York that we were coming. We just announced it, and we felt really great about it and our opportunities there. And we had to do some minor construction on the restaurant to get it where we wanted. So we probably had we were looking at like 6 months of work to get this restaurant turned around. And, we were going to do the same thing, high-end bread bakery, focus on local grains. And for me, it was like a homecoming, right? Like, okay, I kind of cut my teeth in New York. I got my education in New York. 3 years later, I'm able to come back and open this, really this restaurant that I'm really proud of what we did. And, that was when, my life sort of changed drastically commuting from Philly to New York.
I'd love to talk about that day. Most people just kind of go about their day thinking that everything's going to be normal and unremarkable. I'm sure a lot of our listeners know, but can you talk about the day that kind of changed everything?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was May 12th, 2015. I'd come down and cook this special luncheon for these ladies who had requested it. These really 10 amazing women in Philly that had recently been recognized. And I want to do something nice for them. So I came down, and it was not my normal day to be down there. And, I stayed through service. It was around 8:30. I was like, okay, I'm going to wrap up. I think it was a Tuesday or something. So it wasn't like we had like a busy service or anything. And so I wrapped up, and usually I would take the later train up to New York, the 10 o'clock train. But this one I was done early. So I jumped on the 9:05 train, Amtrak train 188. Walked down the platform, got on the train as normal. Train took off as normal, and nothing special happening. 9 minutes in to the train ride, it was dark. I couldn't really tell how fast we were going or where we were or anything. And I feel like this really big shudder in the train, more than normal. And, within a second, the train had derailed off the track, going 108 miles an hour in a curve that was a 55 mile an hour curve. The engineer had basically lost track of where he was. There was some distraction from another train getting a rock thrown at it, that he was on the radio apparently, just sort of lost track of where he was. He thought he was entering a straight stretch. He accelerated, and he was accelerating through the curve as the train derailed. So he had completely become disoriented. And, the first 4 cars of the train derailed, and it was a big deal. A lot of people lost their lives. 8 people died. I was in the second car back from the engine, so we were kind of right there where the engine had come off the track. It was the business car, and then it was the quiet car where I was, and I was in the very front of the quiet car, where they had like the double seats for larger groups. They can sit and face each other. Well, it was a slow night on the train, which I still understand why there was such a slow night on the train, because usually this train would be packed. But, I was able to put my feet up on the seat and just kind of kick back and close my eyes and, take a nap on the way home. And like I said, 9 minutes in, the train derails. I go flying through the air. I don't know if you can imagine this, but I was on the left side of the train facing forward. The train derails to the right. So it kind of just springboards me, up in the air. And whatever reason, I turned about 90 degrees in the air and my neck hit squarely against the luggage rack of the other opposite seats. And it immediately, compressed my spinal cord and shattered the spine there. So, and sort of fell into a heap and under a bunch of stuff and debris, and it was dark, and nobody knew what was going on. I pretty much knew that my life had changed in a big way, but yeah, I was paralyzed from essentially the chest down at that moment.
So you knew essentially, like when you were on the ground, that like you couldn't get up and walk and shake that off.
Yeah. So immediately I'm laying. I'm technically in the train still, but I'm laying on what would be the side windows because it would flip over to the right. So I was like kind of on the rock and the stone that was kind of around the track, and immediately try to push up. I knew stuff was on me, so you try to go push up, but nothing works. And that's how quick it happens with spinal cord injuries. It's just in a matter of a second, a split second, your body just goes limp.
And it could have been much worse. I mean, there were many people who died, but was it Christopher Reeve? Like he fell off a horse or something? Was that spinal cord?
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Like that?
Yeah, Christopher Reeve, Superman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Spinal cord injury, especially one that's at the level of mine where it's higher up, because you have your spine is as you work your way down, you have a lot of people are paraplegic. A lot of people see paraplegic people pushing themselves in the chair. Well, my level of injury, I need a power chair to get around, and I'm highly impacted. I lost my ability to grasp something with my hands. That was the last time I used a chef knife. That was the last time I walked. That was the last time, you name it, all those things that you take for granted on a daily basis, it was gone in a second, in an instant.
I can't even imagine. But, like from a professional level, your whole career, you're a chef at kind of the top of your game. You're in the kitchen, you're standing, you're cooking. Like, what was that period of adjustment? Like, you're not going to go back to working in a kitchen, cooking in a kitchen. How long did that whole recovery process take? And then kind of the process of, I guess, figuring out what you're going to do for your career? Yeah,
that was the harsh reality of it. I was just coming off, Food and Wine Best New Chef. The restaurant that we were, my dream restaurant in New York was happening. I had left New York, not because I wanted to leave New York, because the opportunity was so great in Philly. I had no intention of leaving New York. So for me, going back to New York was like, yeah, let's do it. I love New York City. You know what I mean? I was never one of those people like, oh my God, I have to stay in New York City or I'll die. There's a lot of those people out there. Like there's no other city out there that's possible you could live in. For me, Food and Wine Best New Chef, that was like one of my dreams. That was, I worked for a chef in New York who had just recently had been named Food and Wine Best New Chef when I was doing my externship. And I just saw like the excitement of it and, what that meant. And, in New York City and, these events you would go to and parties. And I was like, all right, this is definitely on my list of things I need to accomplish. And I was at the top of my game and, the future was so bright and there was no reason that we would think that anything would fail. You know what I mean? We felt that we were somewhat bulletproof, and we felt so confident going into New York City, but the harsh reality of it is that the leader of that restaurant, especially the kitchen, me, I was not going to be a part of that much. We were in the middle of building a restaurant. We couldn't stop, so it still happened. I was definitely part of those conversations, early on as far as the menu and working with my team. But we had to hurry up. We had to rush and bring people from Philly up to New York to kind of fill my void. And the restaurant just never was able to catch the steam that we had hoped. My absence just made it so hard to manage that restaurant from Philadelphia alone. And it's still there. We're actually hopefully going to be selling it soon. It's sort of limped its way through COVID, and we've had to restructure it a little bit. But it's still there. We were really proud of the work we did there. A lot of people worked their asses off for that restaurant. It's just that it's hard to replace like the leader of that restaurant. I was present, but I was going through rehab, 3-4 times a week. That most I could spend down there was 2 or 3 hours a day, maybe 2 times a week, 3 times a week, because also my stamina, my energy level was so low. My voice, I couldn't hardly talk. My voice has gotten much stronger since I got injured, but the diaphragm is affected, right? Which helps you project your voice. And I could hardly even speak above a whisper, So I was going through all these things. Not only that, but just just dealing with the agony of the pain of it, and you're figuring yourself out. It's not any different than essentially learning how to walk again or crawl, or you're essentially an infant. Your brain is still there, your mind is still sharp, but your body you have to relearn every single thing. And some things you're never gonna be able to do again. But just the process of learning how to get creative. How am I going to brush my teeth? How am I going to feed myself? I couldn't hardly move my arms. I couldn't even bring my hand to my mouth. Now I have that ability because I've gotten stronger with a lot of rehab and exercise. But at the moment, I couldn't even scratch my nose.
And I know you've been very outspoken about depression. How long were you in a dark place?
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I would say the first 18 months was very difficult. And it wasn't only because of the injury. I was also having a lot of personal issues with my marriage. And it was just this cascade of, constant bad news, essentially, for those months. And at one point, it got very low. I didn't know if I wanted to live anymore. I didn't know sort of what my plan, my purpose was anymore. I lost my entire purpose, as a chef. And, here you go from leading a brigade of chefs into the service every night. You're pumping them up, you're high-fiving, you're drinking a beer afterwards. That was a great service, good job. We got our asses kicked, but we did it. That camaraderie, that was what I was good at. And then I lost my entire purpose, except for my purpose of being a father to my kid, who was 3.5 years old at the time, not old enough to remember really much. So if it wasn't for my kid at the time, I don't know where I would be right now. And, I knew that it wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about, what my goals were in life. It wasn't about, I sort of had to give that up a little bit and say, you know what, Eli, get over yourself. Yeah, you lost a lot of opportunities professionally. Your career didn't go how you had it in mind. Your life isn't going how you had it in your mind. But get over it, because you have a young son who doesn't look at you any differently. For him, it's like, okay, wow, my dad's in a wheelchair. Let me ride on it. That was cool for him, right? Like, it made zero impact on him. I mean, long-term effects of having a father in a wheelchair to be seen. I know that it does have an impact on him at times. He does get frustrated with it. He just mentioned the other day something about it. And, you just have to say, like, listen, it's a challenge that life gives you. And you just have to be prepared for those challenges and, make the most of them. And, I think it will, at some point in his life, he will look back and say, you know what, I learned so much from that, that time, as a kid with a father in a wheelchair, that maybe is even better than, all the times I could have tossed him a ball or kicked the ball, or, all the things I had in my mind that I was going to be as a father.
And being a working chef is tough, especially in high-end restaurants. I mean, who knows what your relationship would be like if you were the chef in 2 restaurants in 2 different cities. I mean, there's a lot of people who get divorced. They don't see their kids grow up. The work-life balance is really tough for restaurant chefs. So in that regard, you probably are going to end up having more time with him, especially at this younger age, right?
Without a doubt. I mean, silver lining, it was definitely, it gave me the opportunity to spend so much more time with him than I would otherwise. As a divorced parent, I have 4 days with him a week, and it's when he's with me, and we're together. Otherwise I would, I still think about, okay, but I really want to, like, create a restaurant concept again and open it sort of within our own company now, and something that was more focused on something that I wanted to do. And I don't know if I can trade that time off. I don't know. It's going to take me away from, the time I spend with him. If I open my dream restaurant, whatever my dream restaurant is right now, if I was to open that, it would take time from him. And I don't know if that's something I want to do.
And you've stayed on with your company as the culinary director. So you've been with them this whole time.
Yes. So without a doubt, I mean, Ellen and I are still very close. Since COVID, since our company kind of retracted like a lot of companies did, we were in a growth phase and we sort of, we had to sort of halt that. It's really been great to see the people that we have leading our kitchens. We're all there before COVID, and they're all matured now. Like, they don't need my input. I'll come in and eat and I'll give them feedback on what I had. But, for me, it's allowed me this opportunity to, focus on my podcast, Chef Radio Podcast. We have another one called Delicious City Philly now. But, it's given me this opportunity to kind of completely pivot of what I thought was my passion, my purpose, and apply that same desire to what I'm doing now. And, it's been great. It's been a fun ride. I won't say that podcasting fills that void for me. It really doesn't. That void will never be filled for me. Being a chef, there's just no way. I think it's there, and I got to accept it. Nothing will take that place because, for, the better part of 20 years, I was grinding every day to reach my goals, I accept that, and, I've sort of moved on from that. It's still an itch that I might scratch someday, get back into it more fully. But at this point, I'm pretty content doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I love doing the podcast, but I still feel that I'm a chef. It would be great to make more revenue off of this kind of thing and see where that goes. But I still want to be out cooking in some respect. I don't know that I could stop that completely. So for me, it's
Absolutely.
Like finding the balance. So let's talk about that. Why start a podcast? I mean, I know it's the cool thing to do these days, but how did that come about?
Yes, you're right. There are a lot of podcasts out there. Ever since I was injured, it was really hard for me to stay connected to the industry. And I would see chefs maybe at like an event or something, but like sort of that camaraderie that you have between, the chefs in your restaurant group, but also the chefs that, that you might just like run down to the restaurant like before service and say, what's up to, or, for me, it was reconnecting to the industry and really being able to sit down with these chefs and get to know them more on just a more personal level, because a lot of them, they're your friends, but you're always working so much. You're not really hanging out outside of work. Everybody has their family, everybody has their, their to-do list on their days off. So it's not like you're getting together and just like, hitting around, go and play around like golf or anything. So the time that we do have to spend together often is, in these sort of small moments, during the day, them popping into your restaurant, saying hi, vice versa. That's really what I was able to do, for me, to sort of reconnect me to these people. And it was great. I sat down. We started it right before COVID. We didn't really know what was sort of happening. We recorded about 4 pilot episodes right before COVID. And, some of the episodes you can hear is kind of like talking about like, oh, what about this cruise ship with all these sick people on it? Not knowing exactly what was coming down the pike. So, and then, once COVID hit, it was really an opportunity for chefs to kind of communicate to each other and say, okay, this is what I'm going through. Let me listen to this other chef and see if this correlates with what they're going through. And, there's different challenges. And of course, COVID was, the first thing we talked about on probably the first 30 podcasts. But, at this point, we're getting through it, and, we're talking about it less, which is great.
It's an interesting time capsule. I was doing my podcast exclusively in person prior to, and when I started doing them from home, I started calling them the COVID Zoom sessions in the intro. And I've left that in there because I just thought it was going to be this blip of like, maybe 4 episodes over this month. And it was also a way to say kind of like, oh, the audio quality maybe sucks because I'm not using my good mics and everyone's from home. And just to kind of let people know these I'm doing virtually. And then when it looked like it was going to be a little extended, I invested in better mics for my home and a better setup and kind of talking people through the process of getting a better recording. Because I'm like, oh, we're going to be doing this for a little longer. But it'll be interesting, going back, having that as a recorded thing, talking to these people and what they were going through during that time. Same, I probably had 30 episodes where we're talking about supply chain issues and closing your business and, pivoting, which everyone was doing.
The pivot, right? Everybody's the word of the year, pivot.
And then you decided, because you have nothing else going, you would get involved in a second podcast as well?
Chef Radio podcast. That's me and a chef, or me and a couple chefs. We're talking. It's a one-on-one interview. And I think a lot of people don't realize podcasting, while it does, you can reconnect with people, it's kind of lonely, right? You're doing a lot of the work in a vacuum. You're at home, you're doing the editing, you're doing all the processes to get ready for it. And you don't get a lot of feedback. Like as a chef, you cook a plate of food, you put it out and somebody eats it and you can watch them, right? You can watch them. Oh, ooh, wow. Like I was a voyeur. Like I love watching my guests eat because, I'd sort of stare at them. Hopefully it didn't creep them out, but I'd watch them and, it was this, I would get feedback immediately. Well, with podcasting, you don't get that. Some people review. Everybody out there, please review your podcast because it does help us. It really does give us that feedback that we want. And it does go a long way. So, other than that, podcasting can be kind of lonely or on a bit of an island. And, you have to be self-motivated and all that to get it done, where this other podcast was an excuse for me to get a couple friends in the studio and kind of do more of a podcast about the Philadelphia dining scene. So, the best things we've eaten, that's like the best bite as a segment. We have, the food news. We have a local food journalist that does that, Sarah May Alano. We have a local radio producer, Marissa Magnata from a local rock station here, WMMR, that she's like the every person, but she loves food, she loves eating, she loves going out, drinking, bars, all that. So she kind of brings that perspective. So it's the three of us talking about like where we've eaten essentially, and we do it every other week, and it's a blast. And that has sort of allowed another itch to be scratched, which is creating like this social atmosphere within a podcast studio. You're bringing in local celebrities, you're bringing in local food enthusiasts, whatever, you get more creative. And it does have that. We've modeled it sort of after like a drive time radio show would have. So you have these different segments that are sort of hard hitting and fun and keep it light, where, Chef Radio podcast, that's a little bit more, just talking about the journey, the origin stories and things like that.
It's also great because it kind of highlights local businesses. I think that's really nice when you can kind of give someone a little plug, so to talk about the places that you're loving right now. People are always looking for recommendations. As much as I think everyone knows about X place,
Mm-hmm.
You always see people like, where's the best place to get pizza? Or, where's the best place to get that pork, sandwich, hoagie?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what do you want to leave our audience with today? Is there anything you want to throw out there before we get out of here? Obviously, they should listen to your podcast.
Are you giving me a soapbox here?
Yeah, sure. Whatever you got, I want to make sure that if there's something that we haven't touched on that you want to get out there, this is your time. Whatever you got.
I think for me, it's, we all have our struggles every day. Everybody has their personal struggles. Everybody's busy. Everybody's going through things. Anxiety is at an all-time high. And for me, about probably when I was like 28, 29, 30, I had struggled with anxiety, this feeling that I didn't really know what it was, and a lot of it turned out to be anxiety and fear of the unknown in my career, and just wondering if I was on the right track and if I was doing the right thing, if I was in the right restaurant, because I was nervous I was going to become this mediocre chef. And, for me, I think in our industry, it's always been this, it's like the toy box, all the broken toys in it, right? We're a bunch of, whether it's a doll missing a head or the analogy of a wheel off of a truck, we're all these sort of broken toys in our industry. While it's becoming more professionalized, more than we've ever seen it before, which is a fantastic thing. And we need that. It's always been people that are often dealing with some sort of trauma in their life, and, depression, mental illness, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, like those things have been rampant in our industry for a very long time. For anybody listening out there that is going through something that is extreme challenge in your life, it doesn't have to be that you're paralyzed. It can be the fact that your car broke down, you can't afford it, whatever it is. And it can be very easy to kind of go down this dark spiral of this is not the way it's supposed to be, and start blaming people and blaming other things. But I think just, keep that positive attitude is so important. There's even great podcasts out there. One of them is The Positive Mindset Coach. And just like listening to that, for example, there's so many great resources out there. Don't live your life unhappy and feeling like you're the only one going through something. There's going to be somebody that's out there that's going to be able to help you get through it. And just, preach positivity every day. Challenges are going to happen, but just sort of keep your head down and find the people that are going to, care about you and put your positive energy there.
We've talked about this a lot, especially in this past year or so. Like, I've dealt with anxiety. I mean, I was having what turned out to be like panic attacks that I didn't even know. I was on acid reflux medicine for 20 years, not realizing that it was not food. They always talk about food and your diet and exercise, and it was anxiety.
Yeah, like I said, like people are going through stuff every day. Every day, it doesn't matter how big or small it is. If it's you, it's a big problem, for you. And find ways to cope with it. Don't go down this path of, self-destructive behavior, which you see so often in our industry. Stay on the right side of the line. And, there's a lot of great resources out there for anybody that's struggling. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for being so open with that. And, I can't imagine it's easy talking about, I'm sure everyone wants to talk to you about your story with the train and the paralysis. I don't know. Does it get easier the more you talk about it? I imagine it's still fairly difficult to get into.
No, because I think it's a great story. I'm happy to share it. Unfortunately, a lot of people who have an injury this catastrophic, they lose their purpose in life. They lose it, and it can be very, very difficult. And, for anyone out there that I can, be a resource for, or if I can make one person's day a little bit better or brighter based on my experiences, I think that's something that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise. I think it changed me. I think at that moment in my career, I felt I was invincible. And for me, it kind of brought me back down to earth and what's important, and, focus on the important things in life, which are, family, friends, and, work. And your passion is important, and you should foster that, especially if you have a love for what we do.
Well, I look forward to following along. I think you're going to be a continued voice in the culinary industry, and probably more impactful with the work you're doing now. So, and everyone should go listen to both of your podcasts. Any place else you want to direct our listeners to?
You can find Chef Radio or Delicious City anywhere you find your podcasts. You look up my Instagram, and all those links will be there. Chris, I can't say enough. It was really a pleasure to talk with you, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to come on your show. I'm sort of a chef without a restaurant in a way. I have restaurants, but I don't really have restaurants. So I guess I fall somewhere in there.
You most definitely do.
Right on, man.
Thanks again. And to all of our listeners, this has been Chris with the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. Have a great week. Go to chefswithoutrestaurants.org to find our Facebook group, mailing list, and chef database. The community's free to join. You'll get gig opportunities, advice on building and growing your business, and you'll never miss an episode of our podcast. Have a great week.